All right, if you have a Bible tonight, turn to Luke chapter 14, verse 23. Now, Luke chapter 14, verse 23, you have a parable there of the great wedding supper. It's called the marriage supper in Matthew chapter 22, and here it's just called a great supper. And you know the story. It's about the man that had a great supper and sent out the servants up and down the highways and the byways to gather folks to the wedding and bring them in and give an invitation to come to the supper. And they made light of it. One went to his farm, one went to his merchandise. Our Bible says in one place they with one consent began to make excuse, like they always do. And they put the thing off and put it off. And then the Lord says down there in verse 23, He says, in effect, He says, go out in the highways and go out in the hedges, and He says, compel them to come in that my house may be full. And they go out in the highways and the hedges in Matthew chapter 22, and they bring in the halt and the lame and the maimed and the blind, and the house is filled. Now, my subject tonight is bring them in. And by bring them in, I'm talking about Christian people, bringing people into a place like this where they can hear the gospel. Now, I realize that's a misapplication of text. That is, I realize perfectly well in the text in Luke chapter 14, he's talking about you going out and inviting sinners to come into heaven. That's the context of Luke 14. There's nothing doctrine in Luke 14 about you making folks come to church. When he says go out and compel them to come in, my house may be full, he's not talking about this building here in the context. This isn't, this is a church building. I know you southern people, you've heard it's the house of God for so long, you probably never get it out of your system. But this building here is a church building, and the people in it are the church. This is not the house of God. You're the house of God. This isn't the temple of God. You're the temple of God. But in the passage he says, take those people and compel them to come in, that my house may be full. Now, I want to make a little application with that tonight, and I realize there's nothing in the Bible telling Christian people that they have to invite people to church. I know that. And I'm aware of that when I preach this message. I'm further aware of the fact that in the Bible, there's no such thing that you can find where anybody actually goes out and tries to get anybody to come into a building. As far as I know, buildings are pretty modern innovation. Sometimes I think they're the devil, even a good building. Do you know a beautiful home can be a prison? That's right. A beautiful home can be a prison. Americans, they dream of this big 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom, dinette, kitchen, living room, den, 3 carport, backyard, all that kind of business. And when you get that thing, you know what it is sometimes? It's a jail. It's a jail. You got to spend your whole life keeping it and cleaning it and paying for it and taxes and the thing and going repairing this and upkeep on that. You got to look out for buildings. And I'm perfectly aware of the fact that there's very little in the Bible about buildings as far as the Lord is concerned, but there's some very true, practical things that had to do with Christian people inviting other people to church, and especially a church like this one. When I say a church like this one, I mean when you come in, they just hit you right in the face, man. I mean just plain, unadulterated, unsheeted word, just right smack in the face. That's where it ought to hit you, too. Did you know back in this country 50 years ago, no matter what church you went into, it hit you that way? But times have changed. Back in the old days, a fellow went in the Baptist church, he walked in there and he got hellfire and damnation as soon as he got in. He stepped in the hole in his church, got the same thing. He ran 3 blocks down and stepped in the Methodist church and got the same thing. Ran a mile away and went in the Presbyterian church and got it again, man. Back in those days, folks got under conviction and stayed under conviction, brother. They couldn't run from it. Fellow go to a Lutheran church, old boy's preaching new birth, you're going to go to hell and burn if you don't get right. But not anymore. Not anymore. All right, now I'm going to talk tonight about why you ought to bring them in. And when I say bring them in, I mean bring them in where they can hear the Word. Now, the first reason why you should is this. You're not going to see, some of you, now some of you are and some of you aren't, you're not going to see people saved unless you bring them into a building like this. Now, I know some of you are personal workers, and thank God for it. And you go door to door and house to house, and thank God you do. But some of you don't visit like that. Some of you don't have the nerve to do it, you don't have the courage to do it, you don't have the interest to do it. Now, let me ask you something. If you don't have the courage to do it, and the interest to do it, and the nerve to do it, how are you going to see people saved? I think somebody ought to get up and walk down this aisle every time and have a gospel message and get saved. I like to see people saved here Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, 52 Sundays and Wednesdays out of the year. But don't, but I wish they did. You know why? I like to see it. I enjoy seeing it. Don't you enjoy seeing it? Sure you do. Now listen, did you know something? If some of you don't bring folks in, you're not going to see it. Some of you aren't going to do personal work out in the streets. You never have, you never will. Some of you are not going to go door to door and do visitation. You never have, you never will. Some of you, if you don't see them saved right in this building or some other building, some revival, you're not going to see them saved. That's one reason you ought to bring them in. Now, you are living in a day and age when people don't walk by faith, they walk by sight. There never was an age that walked more by sight than this age, and you know that. I mean, you folks that have television sets, you know how much people today live by sight. They just live by sight all the time. They don't walk by faith. Back in the old days, you know, you could preach a message and trust somebody get saved and believe it and accept it and live on it. But not anymore. You have to see it. Did you know when George Whitefield and John Wesley preached, did you know they very rarely ever gave an invitation? I heard a preacher say a preacher ought to give an invitation every time he preaches. Wesley didn't. And he won more souls than Billy Sunday ever thought of winning. But back in those days, folks knew more about faith than they know now. Nowadays, you live by sight now. Boys and girls today, they don't spend much time listening to the radio. Did you know about the only thing you can get on radio these days is dirty music and newscasts? You can't get any good stories. You can't get any good plays. You know why? Nobody has any imagination anymore. The Christians don't. Why, the Christian today doesn't have as much faith as an unsaved man had in this country 25 years ago. The Christian is walking by sight and living by sight. And so I say, if you don't bring them in, you're not going to see people saved. Now, you want to see people saved. Folks say, what's the matter with our church? Nobody ever gets saved now. Said, nobody ever gets saved? You want to see people saved, don't you? Well, if you want to see people saved, I'll tell you something you're going to have to do. You're going to have to bring them in, some of you. You're going to have to bring them in, or you're never going to see them saved. And you're just going to sit there, you're going to say, no results. Pretty soon you're going to have a gloom hanging over your head like, who's that character, Little Abner, that walks around with that cloud over his head all the time? What they call him, Calamity Joe or something or other, you know. And so you have Christians that just spend year after year coming to church and sitting there with that thing hanging over their head, you know. Nobody ever gets saved. Whose fault is it? Must be the preachers. Must be the choir directors. Must be one of the deacons. Somebody's grieving the Spirit. Somebody's quenching the Spirit. Well, folks, I tell you, if you don't bring unsaved people in, you're not going to see them saved. I preached to this congregation here at least 50 times in the last 7 years when there wasn't an unsaved person anywhere in the building. You just can't keep preaching John 3:16 to Christians. And so I say this, you got to bring them in if you want to see them saved. Back in the old days, folks would go a long while without results. It didn't bother them. Sam Jones, those old-time evangelists, they'd preach sometime 4 and 5 weeks and wouldn't give an invitation. It didn't bother them any, but it bothers you. You're impatient. Why, back in the old days, folk could sit and hear a man preach for 4.5 hours. You can't. You know why you can't? You don't live by faith. You live by sight. See? Got to get out, got to get out, got to get this, got to get... You live by sight. Back in the old days, if I run 4 hours, they could take it. Nowadays, you can't get a congregation to stay awake more than 50 minutes under a good message. A good message. A poor one, man, they won't stay awake 15, 20 minutes. And so, folks want to see. You folks that have children, don't they always want to see it? How about Christmas time? You know, when I was a boy, we had a pantry out in the back of the house, and they pile up the Christmas presents and that before Christmas, before they put them out on the tree. And us kids were always going back in that pantry. There were 3 of us, and we were feeling those things, and squeezing them, and shaking them, you know. We said, I think it's one of these. It is not, it's one of those. Look at here, you know. By the time you got the thing, it was all broke up and just squashed to pieces from feeling it. And if folks want to see, I used to always want to see Santa Claus. And I'd wake up at night, stay up at night, wait and wait and wait. Boy, the little boy, about 2 in the morning, I was sitting in that bed just, like that, you know, trying to catch Santa Claus. And I finally caught on. He couldn't have got down the chimney anyway, because I climbed up on the roof one time, looked at the chimney. It wasn't big enough for him to get in. It was only about that big around. You know about the little boy, you know, at school he uttered this terrible cuss word, and I asked him where he got it from. He said he learned it from Santa Claus. And the teacher said, well, how was that? He said, well, I heard him say when he tripped over a chair in my room coming through to set up the presents. And folks, they want to see what's going on. See, they can't live by faith. And so I say this. I say if you want to see folks saved, you know something you're going to have to do? You're going to have to bring them in. You have to bring them in. And if you don't bring them in, you just can't sit and sit and sit and sit and get anything out of the services forever. You want to see some results. I don't know a preacher in the world doesn't want to see some results from his work. I read about missionaries who preach in Burma and preach in India for 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years without a convert. I've read of missionaries that preach the Indians and the Chinese and preach 10 and 20 years without a convert. But I know that's back in another age, and I know missionaries today couldn't do it. Because this age lives by sight. They don't live by faith. When I don't win a soul in about 4 weeks, I start getting nervous and get disturbed and upset. I haven't won one in about 4 weeks. I'm getting nervous right now. I'm going to go out here in this parking lot at Town and Country Plaza Shoppers Fair. When I get like that, I just go out there in an afternoon and just go car to car and catch a fellow when he's coming back from shopping, just climb in the front seat with him. You get good results that way. Just climb in the front seat with him and say, I want to talk to you a minute, buddy. So I know you think I'm crazy, and then give it to him. But you folks that don't do that, see, you count on them getting saved here, and they're not going to get saved here if you don't bring them in. All right, the next thing. You'll not only not see people saved, but you'll get the place where you're going to question the power of God. You're going to talk about the power of God, but if you never see anybody saved, what do you know about the power of God? I have some of our brethren talking about the power of God and the power of the Spirit and this and that. Some of them haven't had a soul saved in the church in 3 years. This Christian is going down the altar and praying through and rededicating and trying to get the Holy Ghost and trying to get sanctified. Talking about the power of God. Well, if there's power there, there's salvation there, brother. Where the word of the King is, there is power. The gospel is the power of God and the salvation of them that believe. And brother, when you got power, you got people being saved. And you folks who never see anybody saved, what do you know about the power of God? When you want to get healed, and you want to get power and help from God, what do you know about it if you've never seen anybody saved? You need to bring them in because you'll begin to doubt and question the power of God. God's people today are not living by faith, they're living by sight. A man said this one time. He said, you're never going to have the privilege and blessing of seeing souls saved by sitting and watching if all you do is sit and watch. Now, something to that. If all you do is sit and watch, God's not going to let you sit and watch people get saved. If you want to see people get saved, you're going to have to get up and go. And if all you've done is sit and watch, you can sit here every Sunday this year, you're not going to see them saved. You're not going to see them saved till you go. You got to go. God isn't interested in the self-centered church. And I've told my people that for years and years. Many of them paid no attention to the warning, and finally the warning caught up with some of them. But I've told our people about that for years and years and years. God is not interested in a bunch of Christians that just have fellowship and enjoy fellowship and discuss each other and analyze each other and figure each other out and talk about each other and stick the nose in each other's business and don't care whether the world's going to hell or not. The Lord ain't interested in it. I tell you, every church that ever got in a jam anywhere in the world got in a jam that way. The Christians pulled in on themselves to where they were just a little group, just, you know, so-and-so and so-and-so, so-and-so this, so-and-so does that, so-and-so did this, so-and-so that, so-and-so this, and like that, I like this, I like that, I like him, and I don't like her, and I like this, and I don't like that, and blah, blah, blah. God doesn't care anything about it. Out there outside the walls of this building here tonight, there are 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 people just lost, they being headed for hell. The sick beds, the death beds, the dead babies, the busted homes, and God isn't interested in a bunch of Christians that just pulling each other to where all they got to deal with is just each other. The Lord isn't interested in it. Never has been, never will be. And if I'll tell you, if you don't see Him saved, you're going to question the power of God. You're going to get just as dry and just as cold, just indifferent. Many of God's people can't live by as much faith as unsaved people live by, like I said before. Years ago, there was a tightrope walker. His name was Bron Beam. And Bron Beam was the greatest tightrope walker that ever lived. And and boy, you talk about walking by faith, brother. He'd go up at night and cross Niagara Falls at night on a tight wire with the light of a locomotive shining across the wire. He'd go up there at night with this big old pole, you know, and walk out across this wire, across Niagara Falls, brother. And when he walked, he never looked at the wire. He just walked like this. Balance that thing. You know what he's doing? He's walking by faith. He wasn't even a saved man. You cannot get results by just sitting and just watching. And the day and age in which you live, that's what folks do, brother. They just sit and they just watch. And then they come to church and they sit and they watch. And I've talked about it and talked about it and talked about it and talked about it, and still some people don't take it to heart, or some people think you done quit preaching and go on to meddling. Like the old colored fellow said, they asked him one time, I said, "Preacher, you done preached that sermon last Sunday." He said, "Well, that's all right." He said, "Yeah, but you done preached it the Sunday before that." He said, "That's all right." They said, "Preacher, that's the fourth time you done preached that message this year. So when are you going to change it? When are you going to give us another one?" He said, "When you do something about that one, you're going to change it. Until you do something about that one, then it's just the same old thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over, brother. Go out and get them. Bring them in. You ought to bring them in because you doubt the power of God if you don't. You ought to bring them in because you'll miss the participation. You'll miss the blessings of participation. That is, you miss the blessings of sharing in something. I know I can get a great blessing from another preacher coming here and preach. I always get a great blessing from it. But did you know there's something kind of secondary about that thing? If souls get saved, if we have a great evangelist coming here and he has a great meeting and people walk the aisle and all get saved, that's a wonderful thing. But did you know it's not a wonderful thing if you don't have a part in it? Did you know the real blessing is knowing that you're part of it? That's the real blessing. Let me ask you this: have you ever won a soul to Christ? You won one this year? You won one the last month? You say, "Now, Pete Ruckman, I've heard that before." Yes, and you're going to hear it again. And I'll tell you, there's no blessing in the world like participating in the blessing. And folks, listen, if you don't bring them in, you can't participate in the blessing. You're missing something. And you may get a little blessing, but you can't get a blessing like that. No way in the world you can. You know, for years and years and years, we've had, and thank God those days are over, but we've had people in this church that actually thought swapping members in classes was growth. I mean, you get about 15 Sunday school classes here, and somebody would steal 5 members out of this one and put them in that one and say we grew 20%. They steal 3 out of this and put up that one and say our class has grown 65%. And those poor, deluded, deceived people going through all that business and thinking that's really the power of God working. That isn't anything. That's just tiddlywinks. Play in church, boy. Put out a sign out in front. Slow down, children at play. That isn't it. You know what it is? It isn't playing, you know, Lucy dropped the locket, ring around the rosy, and who's got the hanky, and London Bridge is falling down. It's going out and getting people saved. And listen, if you want to get a blessing, bring them in. Let me ask you this. How many of you have ever invited anybody to this church or any church and brought them to the church and sat down with them when the invitation was given, they got up and came down and got saved? Let me see your hands. Has that ever happened to any of you? There, about 20 of you. Now, wasn't it good? Now, wasn't it good? And you folks have never had it happen. You're missing something. I'm not being mean. I'm not being nasty with you. I love you, but you're missing something. You need to get in on it. All right. Now, the only other thing is this. If you don't bring them to church, get them in, you're going to have to win them in the homes. If you don't get them into this building and get them under the sound of the gospel and get them saved here, you know what you're going to have to do? You're going to have to go door to door to these homes and get in these homes and get them saved there. You say, "Well, I can't do that." Then you're going to dry up. Now, you just take your choice. Yeah, I'll tell you what, if you're not willing to go out there and get them and knock on the doors and deal with them about the soul and try to win them to Christ, then you've got to bring them in. And folks, if you will not bring them in where they can get saved, and will not go out and get them where they can get saved, the Lord knows you and knows your heart and keeps your soul. You know what you're going to do? You're just going to dry up, just like an old prune. And just dry up and just dry up. You just sit there like an old dried... You ever see a dried apricot? Or a dried prune? Just sitting there, just all wrinkled and just... You know, it's all dried up. You know God's people get that way? You know why I got so many atheists around this country? They've never seen anything grow. Never planted a crop, seen it grow. Let me ask you this. Have you ever led anybody to Christ and watched them grow? You're not an atheist, are you? You Christians, you're saved people. Did you ever watch God grow anything? You say, "I watched my children grow." Did you ever watch Him do anything spiritual? Did you ever lead a man to Christ that just wasn't worth shooting, and then watch him 10 years later turn into a real spiritual soldier? Did you ever do that? Haven't you ever done that? Shame on you. Shame on you. Haven't you got one? How about one? Listen, some of you people sitting here tonight could get one a year. Some of you people sitting here tonight, you're sociable, you're friendly, you're good talkers, you're hospitable, you're good hosts, you're good hostesses. Some of you people sitting here tonight could invite some into your home once a month or once every 2 months and work on them as a neighbor and work on them in your home and see them grow into a missionary or a soul winner to lead a soul to Christ every day of the year. So don't believe it. That's the problem. That's the problem. Still no results. Some of you folks are waiting for ships that never come in, right? You know why they don't ever come in? You never sent them out. That's why. Bible says, cast your bread upon the water. It says, sow your seed in the morning, leaving no withhold your hand, keep putting the thing out. You know what's going to prosper, good or bad alike. Some of it's going to catch, some of it's going to grow. Still no results. You need to bring them in. You say, now you telling me I've got to bring them into this church to get them saved? No, sir, I'm not telling you that. I'm telling you, if you're not willing to go out there door to door, out there in the street, out there in the schools, out there in the factory, and try to win them personally, then you're going to have to bring them in here and let the Lord do it here, or you're going to dry up. And nothing deader and worse in this world than a dried up Christian, because then he becomes a chronic griper. A chronic griper. I like what that... who was it? I don't know who was up in this pulpit here. It must have been about a month, 2 months ago. He's talking about folks you never could please. And he gave some illustration about a man who had his wife cook 2 eggs for him. And he told her to cook one of them scrambled, one of them fried. And she brought him in and he said, take it back and cook them again. And the man eating there with him said, what do you have to do that for? She scrambled one and fried the other. And he said, she scrambled the wrong one. And you know, that thing sounds funny. And yet, you know, I've known Christians like that. I mean, nothing in the world pleases them. So there's something always wrong. You know why there's something always wrong? Because the old heart is restless and unhappy. It doesn't have any joy in it. You know why it's restless and unhappy and doesn't have any joy in it? Because it's not doing what God told it to do. And you know what God told it to do? God told it to go out and get them. Go out and compel them. It'll make you a chronic griper. And nothing in the world hurts the testimony of the Lord any worse than a chronic griper. And nothing in the world is more opposition to a new Christian than a chronic griper. You know, chronic gripers, they stand in the way of Christians that are growing. Here's a new Christian. He isn't much. Most new Christians aren't much anyway. Some just get saved, you know. He's erratic and fanatical, you know, and hard to get along with, and opinionated and loud and noisy, you know. And some of the old bellwethers of the flock, you know, the old founding fathers sit around and arch the eyebrows, raise the eyebrows, you know. What's that, you know? Carry it, Jericho, to your beards be grown, and all that kind of thing, you know. Looking down the nose at them. And you know what the trouble is? You know what the trouble is? They're all dried up. That's what the trouble with them is. I've known new Christians give you a hard time. I've had some of these young men that come down here to go to school give me a terrible time. You folks wouldn't believe it. A couple of these young boys got me in such a mess, I had to go and apologize to a Catholic priest. I'd rather cut off my right arm and apologize to a Catholic priest. But I did it. I had to do it. You say, what do you think of those young men? I think God's going to use them. That's what I think. That's what I think. And I think you ought to be patient with them. I think you ought to love them. And I think any time us church members here at this church have been here for years and years, they're going to get jealous of these young men because they win souls, and jealous of them because they cause a little stir and attention. That's the day we begin to dry up, brother. And don't dry up. Stay with it. Stay with it. Snap out. Snap out of it, man. Just sit there. Snap out of it. Get with it. Go out and win somebody to Christ today. Some of you folks haven't done anything for months and months. With a service over tonight, run down to Dairy Queen, grab one of those young men and call them over. Some of you ladies up in your 40s and 50s. Come on now. I mean, some of you ladies up in your 40s and 50s, just go down there and grab a young man about 18, 19 years old. That's right. That's right. Just haul him over there and say, young man, I want to talk to you as a mother. He'll about die. He'll about die. He probably don't even have a good mother. You'll probably win him in 5 minutes. Did you know that? Why don't you try that? Some of you ladies, some of you younger ladies don't have a wash machine and things at home. Go down the laundromat and go in there and sit down and strike up a conversation with one of those women. You can lead her to Christ. But don't dry up. Don't dry up. Get critical, bitter, griping. And I'll tell you, when God's people lose the joy and lose the victory and start that griping, it doesn't do any good to cultivate them. It doesn't do any good to humor them. It doesn't do any good to sympathize with them. And I'm amazed at some of God's people, how little sense they got when it comes to dealing with unhappy, griping, complaining Christians. Now, I'm talking to mothers and daddies here tonight. And you've got children. Now, let me ask you, mothers and daddies, something. When your child starts this stuff, and you've all heard it, man. If you had any children, you've heard this business. You know, I don't like that. I don't like that. Oh, you know this. I can't eat that. No, I don't want that. No, I go to bed. What do you do? Now, what do? You call somebody over and pat them on the back and say, honey, you're absolutely right. That big, bad mama to make you eat that stuff and go to bed at this hour. Right? You're absolutely right, darling. We understand. And there are 3 more people in this church feel just like you do, honey. No, you don't, mother. No, you don't. I don't. I say, Buster, eat it. Man, eat it. And they sit there and act like they're sick and can't eat it. I told them, you get sick, you have to clean it up. And I'll tell you, when you get God's people where they're dry and fussy and gripey and complaining, it doesn't do any good to sympathize with them and cultivate them. It just makes matters worse. And that reminds me to say finally that this. If you don't bring them in, you're going to become dry and gripey and complaining, and you're going to hurt the testimony of the church. I've never known a church anywhere, I'm not speaking specifically at anybody or against anybody, I've never known a church anywhere that had its testimony hurt that didn't have it hurt by the people that went to it. Christians are only one of their own worst enemies. And they get off balance and get gripey and get complaining, and they seek company. Misery loves company. And they go around and, don't you agree that, the preacher talks a little too loud? Yes. And don't you believe the amen just a little bit too loud? Yes. Well, maybe it is, but don't cultivate the griping. See? And folks say, well, how do you like the way the Sunday school is set up? Don't you think it should be set up this way? Yes, I do. Well, I came up, we set it up this way, And you get in there and you find this little griper, and she's mad because the boy doesn't get recognized, and this old griper gets mad because the money isn't spent in the parking lot, and this old griper over here gets mad because the preacher yells too loud. This griper gets mad because the invitation's too long, and this griper, you just go around and cultivate him, pat him on the back, say, yes, you are certainly right, something has to be, and you just shoot your testimony, brother. You know what you do? You just put up a sign in front of your church and it says, we're wrong. And that's up there for the whole world to see. And you know what that comes from? That comes from a Christian that doesn't go out and get them and won't bring them in. And when you don't go out and get them and you won't bring them in, you dry up. When you dry up, you become a griper. When you become a griper, why, you just shoot the whole thing. We had a fellow in this church years ago. He's no longer with us, but he left about 3 years ago. And that fellow was a very subtle character. I watched him, and I noticed something about him. On Sunday afternoons after deacon meeting, he'd kind of hang around kind of nearby, and when the meetings were over and everybody goes away, why, a telephone call would get to him, and the next Sunday, or the Sunday night right after the deacon meeting, he'd come in the back building, and I'd watch him, and he'd circulate through that building, and any time back there in one of those meetings, there was a little disagreement about something where somebody was kind of trying to get upset about something I'd said or done, he'd find out that man and go right to him. The two of them would talk. And then about a week later, then I'd find out the fellow kind of moving over that way, get on the board over here, and get on the board over there. You know, that stuff, that's satanic, folks. That stuff is satanic. And listen, you griping, complaining, unhappy Christians here tonight, I want to tell you something. You better look out, or your sin's going to find you out, and the only way you're going to keep that joy is keep your heart right and keep out after souls. And don't you think you can sit here and hear me preach and be the same after you hear me preach? You'll never be the same. I've had Christians sit here for 4 and 5 years and take that word and just turn it down, and turn it down, and turn it down, and turn it down, and in their minds they tell themselves, I'm the same man I was 7 years ago. No, you're not. Listen, brother, you can't hear the word 7 years and be the same person you were. You're going to be 30 feet high or 100 feet lower. You don't tread wheel when you hear the word. That word, it do something for you. One time a man went to a doctor and he said, I have a little bit of trouble here. He said, I have trouble in my arm. And the doctor said, well, let me look at it. And he looked at it and he said, this is very serious. How long you had this? The man said, well, I've had it just about a year, just off and on. Feels like my arm's asleep. But he said, it didn't bother me much. Now I noticed kind of coming down my chest. And the man said, well, I've got bad news for you. The doctor said, if you can take it. The man said, well, I'm a Christian, I can take it. And the doctor said, well, I'll tell you what you got. He said, you got a rare disease. It's known as creeping paralysis. And he said, there's no cure for it. And about a year later, the fellow died. And did you know something? As far as a Christian is concerned, there's no cure for creeping paralysis. That is, once you start just withdrawing yourself and turn down that word and refuse to do what God told you to do, that old body begins to toes, and it gets colder and colder and colder and colder and deader and deader and deader and deader. And I honest to God believe the Christians in Pensacola tonight that have been absolutely useless for 35 years and never even knew what hit them. It's that old dryness, it's that old deadness. And it comes from refusal to win souls and refusal to bring them in. Folks, this church here is not just for us to enjoy. I enjoy it. Man, I enjoy it. I enjoy you people. I enjoy the music. I enjoy the singing. I enjoy the praying. I enjoy the whole thing. But it isn't here just for us to enjoy. Now, you folks are out an awful lot. When are you going to give it out? When are you going to give it out? You know why the Dead Sea is dead? Because nothing runs out of it. Everything runs into it. They have a joke about a man from Mars that came down, a robot, you know. You got to look around the country and you saw a fellow working a slot machine. The old boy pulled a nickel, hit the jackpot, and all these coins just came pouring out of that slot machine. And that robot said, rich food will do it every time. So the machine was sick, you know. You get it. And what I'm saying is this. You just take it all in, see. Don't give any of it out. Why, you get sick, you get dead. Now, you folks had an awful lot. When are you going to start giving it out? You need to bring them in. He says in Luke chapter 14, verse 23, he said, go out and the highways and hedges and compel them to come in. If we want to repent here as a church and get right, and I know we do, we want to get on our knees and start over fresh, and I know we do. I know I do. I tell we ought to do. We're going to make a covenant with the Lord tonight, every one of us. We ought to say, Lord, now we're going to do this. We're going to go out there and knock on those doors and get out in those banks, those grocery stores, and out in the street, and out in the plazas and the country squares and the highways and byways, and we're going to try to lead people to Christ. We're going to stay with it. We're going to stay at it day after day, and we ought to tell the Lord, if we're not going to do that, see, if we're not going to do that, then every Sunday, say, Lord, every Sunday, we're not going to come into this building without somebody right beside us. Would you folks make that agreement with the Lord? You say, well, Brother Ruckman, folks are awful hard to get. They promise you to come to church and they don't come. I know that. I know that. Man, I've had them promise me. I got a list over there and 3 notebooks full by 1961, 1965. I guess not more than 10 of them ever showed up out of 3 notebooks full. But 10 were pretty good. One of them was Brother Littlejohn. His name was on there. Brother Edmondson was on there. And Brother Tingler was on there. Brother Boyette was on there. I know they promise they're not going to come in, but some of them are going to. Now listen, let me ask you this. If you won't bring them, and you can't bring them, will you go out after them? Thursday night, Wednesday morning, bring them in. Now let's just change this sign on here. And let's just tell the world, we got the book, we got the Word, we got the Lord, we got what you need. All things are now ready, come and dine.